Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrien Barton, and I'm going to present you a philosophical overview about ontological realism. So as you may know, this notion of ontological realism is very intricate, and here I'm only going to scratch the surface of the topic. And this is a presentation that will be mainly intended for non-philosophers. So first, I'm going to present what is called universal realism, or sometimes metaphysical realism. Then I'm going to present a position that has been very much discussed in the literature of philosophy of science, namely scientific realism. I will present also a few positions which are moderate in the debate on scientific realism. And finally, I will discuss and present a position in applied ontology called methodological realism. So let's start for now with universal realism. And I'm going to explain what is Plato's form theory, Aristotle's category theory, to distinguish two forms of realism, the one of Plato and the one of Aristotle, and then explain how Aristotle influenced the question on the medieval problem of universals. So Plato has presented a theory called form theory through a very famous allegory called the allegory of the cave. So in this allegory, he compares the situation of humans to the situations of prisoners who are in a cave, shackled, and who can only look at a wall on which shadows of objects are projected. And then they believe that these shadows are the real objects, the real entities, but they are not. The real entities are the forms which you can see here on the picture in white. And the task of philosophers is to get free of their shackles and to go out of the cave to be able to contemplate reality as it is. So the forms, for Plato, the real entities, they are independent of the mind and they are eternal, which means that they can exist even if they are not instantiated. That is, in the allegory, even if they don't cast any shadows. And this must be contrasted with the position of Aristotle, who proposed the category theory. He identified 10 different categories, among which substance, quantity, quality. Here you may recognize some entities that are used in some upper ontologies in applied ontology. And one important question is whether those categories describe reality or language. And here Aristotle may have changed position depending on evolving in time in his career. But he had a large influence on medieval scholastics in the 13th and the 14th century, namely on a problem discussed by medieval scholastics, which is the problem of universals. That is, are there entities that explain similarity between individuals? So when we have several individuals, here, for example, we have 3 individuals of cat, 3 particulars of cat, and they are similar in some respect. Are there some entities that explain similarity? Is there something which is a universal of cat, which you can see above, which would explain this similarity? And here in medieval scholastics, you can find different positions about how we can account for similarity between individuals. According to realism, universal realism, as we call it here, well, yes, there are universals. And in this example, for example, there is a universal of cat, which is instantiated in each of the cat particulars. And here, contrarily to Plato's theory, the universal is present in each individual. So it is multiply located. And so universals do not exist out of their instance. So that's for realism, universal realism. Then for nominalists, however, there is no such universals. So we have general words which apply to several individuals, but that's it. And finally, according to conceptualism, we have general concepts. General concepts, which here again can apply for several individuals. But they are mind entities, mental entities. So that's the debate about universal realism. I'm now going to present scientific realism. First, I'm going to explain what is a common core between the various positions that have been called scientific realist. Then I'm going to distinguish 3 dimensions of scientific realism. And finally, make some connections between what we have called universal realism and scientific realism. So here for the presentation of scientific realism, I'm going to follow Chakravarty for his article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So as you may know, a large variety of definitions have been proposed for scientific realism, but a common core can be identified, namely that scientific realism is a position that our best scientific theories give true, or at least approximately true, descriptions of both observable and unobservable aspects of a world which is mind-independent. And scientific anti-realism is simply any position that rejects one or several aspects of scientific realism. So we see already that there are a few terms that would need to be specified. For example, what do we mean by our best scientific theories? It may include criteria of maturity or of theories being not ad hoc, etc. Also, if we want to treat differently observable and unobservable aspects of the world, as would do some forms of anti-realism, then we need to characterize precisely what is observable compared to non-observable. So for example, if you look at something into an optic microscope, is it observable or not? If it's not, then what if you look at something through your glasses, if you need glasses to have a correct sight? Anyway, we can distinguish 3 dimensions of scientific realism. The first one is a metaphysical dimension. It's the idea that there is a world which is mind-independent and investigated by sciences. And some form of anti-realism rejects this dimension, such as idealism, which rejects the mind-independent existence of the world. Then we have the semantic dimension of scientific realism, which is a claim that scientific claims have truth values. And here, instrumentalists might object that no, scientific claims are tools and they can be useful or not useful, but it's not a matter of truth. Finally, we have the epistemological dimension of scientific realism, according to which scientific theoretical claims constitute knowledge of the world. And here, some skeptics would object that when we deal with the unobservable part of the world, then we cannot claim we have knowledge of it. Because, for example, scientific theories are underdetermined by observations or by empirical evidence. That is, there are several scientific theories that are compatible with what we can observe or with our evidence. Some schools of anti-realism have been very influential. One of them is logical empiricism at the start of the 20th century, which usually reject the 3 dimensions of scientific realism. And more recently, we have constructive empiricism by Bas van Frassen, which considers that it's difficult to reject the semantic dimension of scientific realism, so that adopt the conception that scientific claims can have truth values, but that still claims that we cannot have knowledge of the non-observable world, and which therefore makes a clear distinction between observable and non-observable aspects of the world. Now, we can make some connections between what we have called universal realism and scientific realism. One example would be the philosophy of David Armstrong, which has been quite influential in applied ontology. David Armstrong endorses the existence of universals, not in the sense of Plato's forms that can remain uninstantiated, but more in an Aristotelian sense of universals existing in their instances. And here comes the connection between universal realism and scientific realism, which is that for Armstrong, universals are given by physics. And laws of nature are determined by relations between universals. So why does David Armstrong think that we need universals here and that we cannot do just with particulars? Well, we need universals, according to him, to explain counterfactuals, namely what would have happened if something that did not happen would have been the case. And his philosophy has been quite influential on the ontological realism of BFO, the basic formal ontology, with some reservations though. And here I simply refer to this paper by Barry Smith against ontology. I'm now going to present some moderate positions in the debate on scientific realism. First, entity realism, and then structural realism. So entity realism is a position that has been defended by Nancy Cartwright and Ian Hacking around the start of the 1980s. And the idea here is that we should not commit to the truth or approximate truth of theories as would traditionally defend scientific realism. However, according to these philosophers, we can still commit to the reality of scientific entities. Which one? Well, the ones that are involved in what can be called manipulative success. That is, entities which are involved in phenomena that can be routinely used to create some effects. And this has been summarized by Ian Hacking in the case of an experiment in which electrons and positrons were sprayed on a supraconductor by stating, if you can spray them, then they are real. And here, entity realism might be compatible, actually, with some realist positions in applied ontology, because such approaches of ontology would precisely recommend to create taxonomies of real entities, which is close in some respect to what is proposed by entity realism. A second moderate position in the debate of scientific realism is structural realism. So it's a position that has been defended by John Worrall, James Ladyman, and which finds its origins in the work of Poincaré or Duhem. And the idea here, as is stated by John Worrall, is that we can have the best of both worlds in the debate about scientific realism. Indeed, in this debate, we have, according to him, two quite compelling arguments which are pushing into different directions. First, we have the no miracles argument, which is pushing in favor of scientific realism. And it's the idea that the success of science would be truly miraculous if scientific theories were not at least approximately true. On the other hand, we have another argument, which is pushing more in the direction of scientific anti-realism, which is a pessimistic meta-induction. Namely, if we look at history of science, then we see that all our past scientific theories have been abandoned at some point. And this suggests that also our best current scientific theories will be abandoned in the future. And to reconcile these two arguments, structural realism states that we should commit epistemically only to the mathematical or structural content of our theories. So, for example, if you look at Newtonian physics, well, even if the entities of Newtonian physics have been abandoned at some point, when we switch to Einsteinian relativity, still the mathematical content of Newtonian physics has been kept as an approximation of the mathematical content of Einsteinian relativity. So that's structural realism, and here it might be a bit more difficult to make it compatible with realist positions in applied ontology, since, as we said, such approaches of applied ontology have been focused on representing classes of entities and not so much on representing the mathematical content of theories. But here again, it would deserve closer investigation. Finally, I'm going to present a position named methodological realism in applied ontology. So this position has been presented in a paper by Barry Smith and Werner Koisters, in which they consider that ontologies should be viewed as representations of the reality that is described by science, to promote first mutual consistency of ontologies over time, and also that ontologies stay aligned with science. And they add that types or universals are to be understood as counterparts in reality of some of the general terms used in the formulation of scientific theories. So till then, we see there is a quite clear endorsement of scientific realism and universal realism. And indeed, they are realist. However, they also add that even the metaphysical anti-realist can accept putative reference to types or universals as mere façon de parler about other entities, for example, scientist beliefs or linguistic usage, and still get the advantages from their methodology. So there is a possibility here for the anti-realist to use the methodology of ontological realism. How would it be articulated with positions in the debate in philosophy of science? Well, we can find some commonalities between non-realist approach of the realist methodology with fictionalism by Weihinger, the idea that things in the world are and behave as if our best scientific theories are true, or with a natural ontological attitude by Arthur Fine, who says that we should accept the common core between realist and anti-realist attitudes of mere acceptance of our best scientific theories, but reject any further analysis, the metaphysical analysis by realist or the epistemological analysis by anti-realist. So here again, this would deserve closer attention, but that would be some possible connections. So we have views during the talk, several positions, several philosophical positions, universal realism, scientific realism, also some moderate positions in the debate on scientific realism. We have seen some connections with realism in applied ontology, and in particular at the end with methodological realism. This leaves a few questions open. For example, which precise dimensions of realism or anti-realism are endorsed by major upper ontologies such as Dolce, UFO, GFO, Yamato, and others? And also, what would be the practical consequence of each of such dimensions? But for today, that's it, and I thank you for your attention.